I sat at my daughter's wedding, smiling, clapping, pretending everything was perfect. People looked at me as if I was just another guest, an aging mother in the background. No one knew what I carried in silence. No one knew that only a few months earlier my husband had passed, leaving me with $44 million. I didn't tell a soul. Not my daughter, not her new husband, not even my closest friend. Why? Because I've lived long enough to know that money doesn't just change lives, it changes people. As I watched my daughter walk down the aisle, radiant and happy, I whispered to myself, "Stay quiet. Let her have this moment." I thought silence would protect me, and maybe even protect her. But silence has a way of revealing the truth. Because just days later, when the wedding flowers were still fresh, when the photographs were still being passed around, I heard a knock on my door. My new son-in-law stood there, not with flowers, not with gratitude, but with a notary. He came not for love, but for signatures. And in that moment, I realized my silence had been the smartest decision of my life. When I speak about the inheritance, people imagine numbers on a page, digits written neatly on a bank statement. But for me, it was never just money. It was memory, sacrifice, and the weight of a man's entire life's work. The man I loved, the man I buried, and the man who trusted me with everything he had built. My husband, he wasn't born rich. He was the kind of man who came from almost nothing. His parents were factory workers, his shoes were always a little too worn, and his hands were calloused before he was 10 years old. He used to tell me stories about skipping meals just so his younger sister could eat. He learned early what it meant to sacrifice, and he carried that lesson all the way into manhood. When I met him, he was still climbing, still working double shifts, still chasing opportunities nobody thought he would catch. He was ambitious, but not greedy. He wanted security, not extravagance. And when he looked at me, just a young woman with little more than hope in her pockets, he never once made me feel small. He told me, "If we have each other, we have enough." I didn't know it at the time, but he meant it with every fiber of his being. Years went by. He built his business brick by brick, deal by deal. I stood by his side through the late nights, the missed dinners, the seasons when our bank account barely held together. And then, slowly, we began to rise. One successful venture led to another. What started as a modest trade turned into partnerships, then investments, and eventually, a small empire. But he never bragged, never flaunted. He taught me something invaluable. True wealth is measured in peace of mind, not in things you can show off. When he passed, the house felt so quiet it almost hurt to breathe. Grief has a way of silencing everything except your own thoughts. I went through his files, his letters, his will, and there it was, clear as day, $44 million. The number looked unreal. My fingers trembled as I traced the ink on the page. I could almost hear his voice in my ear. "This is for you, for your future, for whatever life demands of you next." It should have felt like a blessing, but instead it felt heavy, like carrying a stone in my chest. You see, money isn't just money when it comes in amounts like that. It's temptation. It's the kind of figure that changes how people look at you, how they talk to you, how they treat you. I had seen it happen before. Not in movies, not in stories, but in real life. When I was younger, a distant relative of mine inherited a fraction of what I now held. A few million. Nothing compared to my 44. But it tore their family apart. Siblings stopped speaking. Cousins fought in court. Greed grew like a disease, spreading until there was nothing left but bitterness. I swore to myself back then that if life ever put me in that position, I would be careful. I would protect not just the money, but the dignity of the family I loved. That's why I stayed silent. My daughter, she is my only child, the one I carried, the one I raised, the one I thought would always see me as her safe place. But as she grew older, I noticed changes. Subtle at first. She became more concerned with appearances, more attracted to the shine of wealth than the substance of character. I don't blame her entirely. The world around her rewarded status. Her friends bragged about vacations, cars, designer clothes. And slowly, my daughter began to crave those things too. I tried to guide her gently, reminding her that respect and kindness outlast any luxury. But she would roll her eyes, call me old-fashioned, and laugh. Sometimes it stung, but I let it go. I thought maturity would teach her what my words could not. But then came the man she married. From the very beginning, I saw something in him that unsettled me. A sharpness in his eyes, a hunger not for love, but for control. The way he measured people, as if weighing their usefulness. He smiled at me, yes, but it never reached his eyes. And the way he asked about my husband's business, about family holdings, about what I might have tucked away, it was too pointed, too rehearsed. That was when I knew. If I told my daughter about the inheritance, it would not remain hers. It would not remain ours. It would slip through her fingers and into his pockets, and once it was gone, so would the bond between us. Still, silence wasn't easy. Do you know what it feels like to watch your own child struggle and say nothing? To see them cutting corners, taking out loans, or worrying about bills, and to know that you could erase all of it with one check. But you don't. It feels cruel. It feels like betrayal. I would lie awake at night asking myself if I was being heartless. If I was letting fear poison the one relationship that mattered most to me. I imagined handing her the news, watching her face light up, hearing her say, "Thank you, Mom. You've saved us." But then, almost immediately, my mind would twist the scene into something darker. I would see her husband standing behind her, his hand tightening on her shoulder, his eyes gleaming with ownership. And suddenly the gratitude was gone, replaced by entitlement, by demands, by the beginning of a slow erosion I might never be able to stop. The truth is, I didn't trust him. And worse, I wasn't sure I fully trusted her either. That thought broke me. What kind of mother doubts her own child? But trust isn't blind. It is earned. And over the years, I had seen small fractures in her loyalty. Times she chose convenience over family. Times she dismissed me, embarrassed by my simplicity, by my refusal to chase status symbols. I told myself, wait, just wait. There will be a right time. But the right time never came. Every opportunity dissolved into hesitation, into that gnawing fear that once the words left my mouth, everything would change. So I built my silence into armor. I invested carefully. I secured accounts in ways that could not be tampered with. I locked away documents where only I could reach them. I smiled at family dinners. I nodded when they spoke about money problems. And I bit my tongue until it almost bled. Sometimes I wondered if my husband would be disappointed in me for not sharing. But then I would remember the way he lived. Cautious, protective, always thinking 10 steps ahead. And I realized he didn't leave me this fortune just to spend freely. He left it to guard, to use wisely, to protect myself when the world turned cold. And it did. Because silence doesn't go unnoticed. My daughter and her husband began to question me in subtle ways. Casual comments like, "Mom, you must have something tucked away after Dad, right?" Or, "You're living alone in that house, maybe it's time to downsize and make use of what you have." He would laugh as he said it, but there was a sharpness in his tone, a probing, always probing. And every time I smiled, deflected, and offered nothing. Each silence was a small victory, but also a small wound. The hardest part? Watching my daughter misinterpret it. She thought I was withholding out of stinginess, that I didn't care enough to help. She didn't see the storm I carried inside, the war between love and fear, between giving everything and losing everything. I cried more than once over it. Alone at night when the weight became too heavy. I pressed my hand against the cold wood of my husband's desk and whispered, "What would you do? Tell me what to do." But of course, no answer ever came. So I endured. I endured the distance, the suspicion, the unspoken tension at every family gathering. I endured the guilt of being seen as selfish when, in truth, I was protecting us both. And that is how I came to sit at her wedding, dressed in my quiet dignity, holding the knowledge of $44 million in my heart, and speaking of none of it. Guests toasted, laughter filled the air, and I kept my secret sealed behind my smile. Because I knew, deep down, that money doesn't unite. It divides. It destroys. And the moment I opened that door, I might never be able to close it again. I kept quiet, even when it hurt. The very first time I met my daughter's husband, something inside me whispered a warning. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was sharp, a small stab of unease that I tried to brush off. I wanted so badly to believe he was a good man, that he would cherish my daughter the way I hoped someone would. But even during that first handshake, I noticed the way he held my hand just a little too long, not warmly, but as if sizing me up, testing me, like I was a pawn in a game he was already playing. He smiled, yes, but it was the kind of smile that never touched his eyes. His eyes, they were always searching, always calculating. I knew that look. I had seen it in business meetings with men who wanted to win at any cost. My husband used to call it the hunger. And when I saw it flicker across my son-in-law's face, I felt my stomach twist. He dressed well. Too well for someone who claimed to be struggling to pay off debts. Everything about him was polished. The perfect watch gleaming under his sleeve, the shoes that looked like they had been shined just hours before, the carefully styled hair. He presented himself like a man who had already arrived, though I knew he hadn't. My daughter once told me he lived paycheck to paycheck, yet he carried himself as though he owned the world. That was my first red flag. Arrogance without foundation. A dangerous kind of arrogance because men like that aren't just confident, they are desperate to prove their image true, no matter what it costs. The second red flag came in the way he spoke. Every conversation seemed to circle back to money. Not directly, not rudely, but in small, subtle ways. What kind of car do you drive? This neighborhood must be expensive. How do you manage? Do you think your husband left you comfortable? The questions came wrapped in casual tones, disguised as curiosity, but I recognized the probing. He wasn't interested in me as a person. He was cataloging information, piecing together a picture of what I might have, and what he might someday claim. Still, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. Love makes mothers blind sometimes. I told myself maybe he was just nervous, maybe he wanted to impress me. But then came the wedding. Ah, the wedding. A day that should have been filled with joy and unity, but instead left a scar on my heart. From the start, he treated me like an afterthought. During the rehearsal dinner, I watched as his parents were seated at the front table, their glasses refilled before anyone else's, while I was nudged to the side, left standing until I asked where I should sit. When I approached him to congratulate him, he barely looked at me, muttering, "Thanks," before turning to laugh with his friends. I wasn't the proud mother of the bride that day. I was the inconvenient reminder of a woman he had to tolerate. Even during the ceremony itself, he barely acknowledged me. When he took his vows, his eyes were fixed on my daughter, but not with love. No, what I saw in his gaze was possession. Ownership. As though by placing a ring on her finger, he had acquired her. Like property, like a prize. And then, when it came time for family photographs, he positioned his parents front and center while I was guided off to the side, almost cropped out of the picture. My daughter noticed, but said nothing. I smiled because what else could I do? I smiled for the camera, even as I felt myself disappearing in the life I had given everything to raise. But the cruelest part came at the reception. I had barely taken my seat when he leaned across the table, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You know," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Now that you're on your own, maybe it's time to think about downsizing. A big house like yours must be hard to manage. You should consider letting us help. I froze. Help? He hadn't even been married to my daughter for a full day, and already he was planting seeds. Not about love, not about family, but about what I owned. My house, my security, my independence. That was the third red flag. Control. Control disguised as concern. He didn't say, "I want what you have." He said, "I'll help you manage it." A predator's tactic, dressing greed in the clothes of generosity. Over the following weeks, I began to see more of his habits. Subtle acts that spoke louder than words. He borrowed money from my daughter without telling me, then spent it on things he didn't need. He bragged to his friends about marrying up, joking that my daughter would never have to worry because her family was comfortable. He hinted that he expected us to pay for their honeymoon, their cars, even their new furniture. Once, during a family dinner, he raised a toast and said, "To marrying into the best opportunities life can offer." Everyone laughed politely, but I didn't. His words weren't about love or partnership. They were about access. Access to me. Access to what I might hold. Even the way he spoke to my daughter revealed his hunger. He would correct her in public, cutting her off mid-sentence to assert himself. He dressed his control as guidance, saying things like, "Sweetheart, let me handle this," or "Don't worry your pretty head about money." He wasn't building her up. He was shrinking her down. And she didn't even see it. She thought he was being protective. I knew better. He was tightening his grip. Every small, greedy act was like a breadcrumb, leading me toward the truth I didn't want to face. He was waiting for the right moment to step into my world and take what wasn't his. And still, I stayed silent. There were nights I lay awake, my chest heavy with worry. I thought about telling my daughter the truth about the inheritance, about warning her of what her husband might do if he ever found out. But the thought of her reaction stopped me. Would she believe me? Or would she accuse me of jealousy, of trying to sabotage her marriage? I couldn't risk pushing her further into his arms. So instead, I watched. I watched as he wrapped himself tighter around her, as he played the charming son-in-law in public, while revealing cracks of greed in private. I watched as he treated me not as family, but as a vault, one he hadn't yet learned how to open. And with every passing day, my unease grew stronger. I knew it was only a matter of time before his patience wore thin, before the mask slipped completely, and before he made his move. Little did I know, that moment would come sooner than I imagined. And when it did, he wouldn't come alone. He would come with paperwork, with a plan, and with a notary standing silently by his side. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays are the quietest days in my neighborhood. No deliveries, no lawnmowers, no children playing outside. Just silence. The kind of silence where you can hear the creak of your own footsteps echo through the house. I was sitting at the kitchen table drinking tea, staring out at the garden my husband and I had once tended together. The roses were beginning to wilt, and I thought to myself, I should cut them back before winter comes. That's when the knock came. It wasn't gentle, not the kind of knock that says, "Hello, I missed you." No, this was sharp, deliberate, almost official. 3 hard raps that made the teacup tremble in my hand. I felt the weight of it before I even opened the door. And there he was, my son-in-law, standing on my porch with that too bright smile stretched across his face. Beside him stood another man, older, dressed in a dark suit, carrying a briefcase. His expression was flat, professional, detached. He didn't smile, he didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to tell me this wasn't a casual visit. "Good afternoon, Mom," my son-in-law said, his tone dripping with false warmth. "We thought we'd stop by. I have something important to discuss with you." We. That word hit me like a stone. We. As though the stranger beside him had any right to be included in my life, in my home, in my affairs. My heart quickened, but I kept my face calm. "Come in," I said quietly. The three of us moved into the living room. I sat in my chair, the one my husband used to call my throne, while the two of them stood hovering, dominating the space. The suited man placed his briefcase on the coffee table, clicked it open, and pulled out a stack of papers. That's when my son-in-law's mask slipped. His smile faded into something harder, more serious. His voice dropped, low and commanding. "Mom, we all know it's time to be practical. You're alone in this house, managing things that are too big for you. My wife and I have been talking, and we think it's best to simplify your affairs. We want to help you manage your assets. Make sure everything's in order." Assets. The word stung. He didn't say life, he didn't say future, he didn't say well-being. He said assets. The suited man slid the papers across the table toward me. I stared at them without touching. Black ink on white pages, full of clauses and signatures. Legal language meant to confuse, to intimidate, but I didn't need to read them to know what they were. Transfers, permissions, a quiet theft disguised as a helping hand. I looked up at my son-in-law. His eyes gleamed, not with kindness, not with concern, but with triumph. He thought he had me cornered. "Just sign here," he said, tapping the bottom of the page. "This will make things easier for everyone. It'll ensure you're taken care of. And, of course, my wife, your daughter, will have peace of mind knowing everything is secure." Peace of mind? My jaw clenched. The audacity of it. He wasn't offering me peace. He was demanding control. Inside, my emotions churned like a storm. Fear, sharp and cold. Betrayal, deep and cutting. Anger, hot enough to burn. This was the man my daughter had chosen, the man who stood in front of me trying to strip away not just money, but the life my husband and I had built together. And yet, I stayed silent. I didn't shout, I didn't argue, I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. I simply folded my hands in my lap and looked at him with steady eyes. My silence unsettled him. I saw it in the way his jaw tightened, the way he shifted from foot to foot. He wanted resistance so he could overpower it. Instead, I gave him nothing. The notary cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "Mrs., if you'd like, I can walk you through the details of the documents. It's very straightforward. Just authorizations, property transfers, rights of management." I raised my hand, cutting him off. "I understand perfectly," I said. My voice was calm, steady, stronger than I felt inside. "But I don't make decisions like this in a single afternoon. I will review these papers in my own time." My son-in-law forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow. "Mom, there's really no need to delay. This is all in your best interest. We wouldn't want to waste the notary's time, would we?" There it was. The pressure, the tightening of the noose. His words weren't a suggestion. They were a command wrapped in politeness. I looked at him, and in that moment, I saw through him completely. His greed was naked, his mask of charm, of concern, of being a dutiful son-in-law. It was gone. What stood before me was a man who had been waiting for this very day, rehearsing his lines, planning his move, but he had miscalculated. He thought I was weak, naive, desperate for help. He thought my silence meant ignorance. He didn't understand that my silence was my shield. I pushed the papers gently back across the table. "I won't be signing today." His face darkened. For the first time, the smile vanished entirely. He leaned closer, lowering his voice as if threatening me in my own home. "Mom, don't make this difficult. You don't need to carry all this responsibility. You'll regret putting this off. My wife, your daughter, she'll regret it too." Ah, there it was. The weapon of choice. Guilt. Using my own daughter as leverage, as a knife to twist into my heart. My pulse raced, but I refused to flinch. I looked him in the eye and spoke slowly, firmly. "I will not be signing today. That is final." The notary shifted uncomfortably, clearly unused to such tension. He began packing up his briefcase, avoiding eye contact. My son-in-law, however, lingered, his hands gripping the back of the chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. For a moment, I thought he might explode. But then he exhaled sharply, plastered a false smile back onto his face, and muttered, "Fine. We'll revisit this soon." And with that, he left. The notary followed quietly, the door clicking shut behind them. The house fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Heavy, suffocating. My hands trembled as I sat alone, staring at the spot where those papers had rested. I felt the sting of betrayal deep in my bones. My daughter's husband, my own son-in-law, had come into my home not with respect, not with gratitude, but with greed bold enough to bring a stranger to witness my downfall. I should have cried. I should have screamed. Instead, I sat very still, the storm inside me hardening into something else. Resolve. He thought my silence was weakness. He thought he could corner me, trick me, strip me of everything my husband entrusted to me. But he was wrong. I signed nothing. But I made a plan. When the door closed that afternoon, and my son-in-law's footsteps faded from my porch, I remained still in my chair. The papers were gone, but their presence lingered in the room like the echo of a storm. My hands were trembling, not from fear anymore, but from the weight of decision. I had a choice to make. I could either wait for him to return, stronger, more determined, or I could move before he did. And though my voice had been silent, my mind had not been idle. For years I had lived in silence about the inheritance my husband left me. $44 million. A number so large it felt almost unreal at times, even to me. I had guarded it like a secret locked away in the attic of my soul. Not because I wanted to hoard it, but because I wanted to protect it. From greed, from corruption, from people like him. Now, staring at the imprint of his betrayal, I knew it was time to act. But not with rage, not with shouting or spectacle. That was never my way. My strength has always been in patience, in thought, in strategy. I wasn't going to throw my fortune at him in defiance, nor was I going to let him steal it from me. I was going to build a wall so high, so quiet, so invisible, that when he tried to climb it, he would expose himself for the man he truly was. The very next morning, I called my lawyer. He was an old friend of my husband's, a man who had stood beside us during business deals and private family struggles alike. His voice over the phone carried the same steady confidence I remembered from those years. When I explained what had happened, the visit, the notary, the papers pushed across my table, he was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, "You did well not to sign. That was an ambush, plain and simple. We'll take precautions, quietly." Quietly. That was the key. Over the next weeks, I met with him discreetly, sometimes in his office, sometimes in small cafes where no one would think to look for us. He helped me restructure my accounts, placing layers of legal protection around the inheritance. Trusts, clauses, private safeguards, invisible barriers that no greedy hand could pry open. It wasn't just about keeping the money safe. It was about forcing the truth into the light. My lawyer explained something that chilled me at first, but later strengthened my resolve. Greedy people reveal themselves when they believe a prize is just out of reach. By staying silent, you let them dig their own grave. And so I did. I didn't confront my daughter. I didn't rush to warn her about her husband. I knew she loved him, believed in him, and any warning from me would only sound like bitterness, like a mother unwilling to let go. No, she had to see him for what he truly was, not for what I told her. That's when I decided to play the long game. When I invited them over for dinner one Sunday evening, I cooked the dishes my daughter loved as a child. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, apple pie. I set the table with care, lit candles, poured wine. To the outside eye, it was nothing more than a mother hosting her family. But I was watching. And I saw everything. The way my son-in-law glanced around the house, his eyes lingering not on the photos or the flowers, but on the silverware, the china cabinet, the paintings my husband and I had collected over decades. I saw how he measured everything in value, not in memory. How his fingers tapped impatiently when the conversation drifted toward childhood stories instead of business. At one point, he leaned across the table, his smile sharp as glass. "Mom, you've done well for yourself, living here all alone. But wouldn't it make sense to downsize? This house is too much. I'm sure the maintenance is eating away at your savings. You could liquidate some of your resources. My wife and I would be more than happy to help manage the process." I didn't answer. I only sipped my wine and nodded faintly. My silence once again unsettled him. He expected a protest, an argument, something he could push against. Instead, he was left alone with his own words, and that emptiness gnawed at him. After they left that night, my daughter hugged me, her warmth as genuine as ever. But when I looked over her shoulder, I saw his eyes. Cold, calculating. It was working. My silence was showing me who he truly was. In the weeks that followed, I deepened my plan. With my lawyer's help, I created a trust that would ensure my daughter's security for the rest of her life, but with strict conditions. She would have full access and freedom, as long as her husband had no legal claim or control. The documents were airtight, designed to protect her from his greed while still keeping her innocent of his schemes. And here was the beauty of it. I told no one, not even my daughter, because silence forces revelation. And soon enough, revelation came. The calls began first. My son-in-law phoning me at odd hours, his voice dressed in politeness but lined with impatience. "Mom, have you had a chance to think about those papers? We really should move quickly. It's for your own good." I would answer with the same calm tone. "I'll think about it." And nothing more. Then came the visits. Unexpected knocks at my door. Him showing up with a smile too wide, his hands empty but his intentions full. Each time he circled back to the same subject. My finances, my future, the supposed burden of wealth. Each time I gave him nothing but silence and vague replies. And each time his mask slipped further. My daughter, bless her heart, didn't see it at first. She thought he was being responsible, caring, attentive. But one evening I caught the faintest flicker in her eyes, a shadow of doubt, when he pressed too hard, when his tone grew sharp as he spoke of my obligations. It was only a matter of time. The beauty of quiet revenge is that you don't need to strike. You only need to let truth strike for you. My son-in-law's greed was a wildfire, and my silence was the wind that fed it, until it grew too large for him to hide. I was patient. I was watchful. I set my protections in place like invisible tripwires, and then I waited. Because I knew, that one day soon, he would reveal himself completely. Not just to me, but to my daughter. To everyone. And when that day came, I would be ready. For now, I smiled, I cooked dinners, I poured tea. To him, I was still the quiet, pliable widow who sat in her chair and trembled at the sight of papers. But inside, I had already built a fortress. My silence was not weakness. It was strategy. And every time he tried to break it, he only revealed more of his true face. By the end of that season, I no longer feared his greed. I welcomed it, because his greed would be the weapon that destroyed him, not me. And all I had to do was stay silent. The moment came quietly, almost imperceptibly. The world did not shake, the sky did not darken, and the birds did not flee. And yet the universe shifted on that ordinary afternoon in a way that would leave no heart untouched, no secret unspoken. It began with a knock at the front door. I was in my living room, reading a letter my lawyer had sent, a letter outlining the final structures of my trust and the protections I had put in place. I had spent weeks meticulously building them, not for revenge in the petty sense, but to preserve what was mine, what my husband had entrusted to me, and what my daughter would one day inherit securely. The knock was hesitant, polite, almost timid. I knew immediately who it was. I set down the letter, smoothed my dress, and walked to the door. There he was, my son-in-law, looking smaller somehow, defeated, the sharp edges of arrogance softened by panic. Behind him, my daughter followed, her eyes wide with confusion, her hands clutching her purse as though it might shield her from the truth she had not yet realized. "Mom," my daughter began, her voice shaky, almost apologetic, almost frightened. I didn't speak. I simply held the door open and gestured for them to come in. Silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable, filled with unspoken tension. He spoke first, and his words were not polished, not rehearsed this time. His voice wavered. We need your help," he said. I didn't understand. I didn't realize. Please, Mom, just forgive me. I can make this right, anything you want." I listened. Every word, every hesitation, every stammer revealed the collapse of his carefully constructed facade. The arrogance, the calculated charm, the smiling condescension, all of it had crumbled like brittle glass. And my daughter, sweet, innocent, trusting, finally saw it too. Her eyes, which had always believed in her husband's goodness, now widened in shock. "Mom, what happened? How did this—" I let the silence answer her, because silence has a power words often cannot match. Weeks of careful observation, of letting greed reveal itself, had brought us here. The son-in-law's plan, the constant probing for my assets, the insistence on controlling every discussion, the repeated subtle threats, all of it had unraveled before my calm, deliberate patience. He looked around my home, perhaps noticing for the first time how little of my life could be influenced or claimed. My accounts, my trust, the legal protections, the arrangements with my lawyer, all of it stood solid and untouched. His ambition, so sure, had met an immovable force. I don't understand," he muttered, almost pleading now. "I thought, your money. I thought it would be, you'd—" I raised a hand gently, stopping him mid-word. Not with anger, not with hatred, but with calm authority. "You assumed because you wanted it, it would be yours. But life does not bend to greed. It bends to wisdom and patience." I could see the shame seeping into him, slowly, painfully, as though each word I spoke was a mirror reflecting the man he truly was. Not my daughter's husband, not my family, but a man consumed by his own desire, undone by his own hubris. My daughter stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Mom, I didn't know. I didn't see. I put a hand on her shoulder gently, soothingly. "I know, darling. I know. And that's why I stayed quiet. I had to let the truth show itself. If I had told you too soon, you might have missed it. And you might have trusted a man who was not worthy of your faith." Her tears fell freely now, and I let them. We held each other for a moment, a mother and daughter bound not just by blood, but by the lessons learned in silence and observation. He fell to his knees, finally, humbled and broken. "Please, forgive me. I'll do anything. I'll fix it. Whatever you ask, I'll—" And in that moment, I felt a serenity I hadn't known in years. I didn't need to ask for apologies. I didn't need to demand restitution. His collapse, his recognition of his own greed, was enough. I shook my head gently. "No, I will not fix you. I will not reward your ambition at the cost of integrity. You will not be given access to what is not yours. You will not touch what my husband entrusted to me and what I have preserved for my daughter." The weight of those words hit him like a hammer. He looked up at me, eyes wide, desperate, pleading, and I held my gaze firmly, unwavering. "No," I said again, calmly. "No. Not because I hate you, not because I want to punish you. but because this is what dignity demands. This is what patience rewards. And this is the power of saying no. My daughter's eyes, now glistening with realization, met mine. Mom, you were right. You were always right. I nodded. Yes, and now you see, not all battles are won with force. Some are won with quiet, steady strength. Some are won by letting truth rise to the surface and letting people reveal who they truly are. The son-in-law shrank back, his arrogance stripped away, leaving only the hollow man who had underestimated patience and wisdom. He understood finally that all his scheming, all his plotting, all his attempts to manipulate and control had failed, not because of luck, not because of chance, but because he had faced someone who would not bend, who would not yield, who knew the value of silence as a weapon far sharper than words. They stayed for a while longer, but the tension had shifted. He no longer attempted to persuade, no longer tried to charm or intimidate. He was simply present, subdued, aware that his power had been taken away. My daughter stayed close to me, silently seeking reassurance that what she had believed was true. Her mother's guidance, her mother's wisdom, was still her anchor. And I realized in that quiet, powerful moment that revenge does not always need to be loud. It does not need to be public. It does not need to destroy. The greatest revenge is patience, dignity, and the courage to stand firm while others reveal their own faces. I had done nothing rash. I had done nothing reckless. I had simply let the truth play out, and the truth had exposed them fully. And as I watched them leave that evening, heads bowed, spirits humbled, I knew something profound. Silence, patience, and restraint are far more powerful than anger, confrontation, or shouting. True strength lies in knowing when to act and when to wait. I made no threats. I uttered no accusations. I did not need to. They had shown me who they were through their own actions, their own greed, and their own foolish ambition. And the most satisfying part of all? I did not waver. I did not compromise. I stood firm, calm, collected, and in that quiet, I had won. My daughter stayed behind for a moment, hugging me tightly. Mom, I understand now. Thank you for everything. And in that embrace, I felt the weight lift. The storm had passed. The battle had been won, not with force, but with patience, dignity, and the courage to say no. Because sometimes the loudest message is not spoken at all. Looking back on everything that happened, I realize now that silence is often stronger than shouting. It's not weakness, it's power. The quiet, the patience, the deliberate choice to hold your cards close to your chest, these are the tools that protect what matters most. Greed is loud. It brays, it pushes, it reaches for what is not theirs. It destroys families, relationships, and trust in ways that are often irreversible. But dignity shields you. It lets you observe, it lets you wait, and it lets truth rise on its own, without force, without spectacle. Through all of this, the wedding, the threats, the schemes, the betrayal, I kept quiet. I watched. I waited. And in that quiet, their true selves revealed themselves. Not my daughter, not my husband, not me, but him. The greedy, entitled man who thought ambition alone could take what was never his. So, if there's one lesson to take away from my story, it's this. Money reveals who people really are. And silence? It reveals who you are. Sometimes the loudest victory is the one you don't announce. Sometimes the strongest voice is the one that never needs to shout. And in the end, that quiet strength, that patient, unwavering dignity, is what truly wins.